this idea of old covenant and new covenant for a believer doesn't mean that we get rid of the Torah, right? Paul says again in Romans 3, near the very end of the chapter, do we make void the law of God because of faith? God forbid. On the contrary, we uphold the law. So the law is still established for us as believers. The primary difference for us is that the law can no longer condemn us, right? It can no longer has that power in our life. It can convict us of sin, and it should, because we're not perfect yet, but we're not condemned as sinners because Messiah has taken that payment, right? He was condemned on our behalf. The whole substitutionary atonement picture all over again that's found all throughout Paul's letters. So the idea of pursuing God by focusing on a list of behavioral commandments. This hurts Rabbinic Judaism's approach because they don't understand that by focusing on commandments instead of focusing on your first love, Yeshua, then what you're doing is you're micromanaging the role of the Holy Spirit in your life. God envisioned the Torah to be walked out by the power of the Spirit, right? The Torah is still relevant for you. As believers, we're designed to keep the Torah, but we're designed to do it by the power of the Holy Spirit, not by maintaining that on our own, in and of our own power and of our own strength. Like I say, micromanaging it, keeping a checklist of do's and don'ts, right? I check this off and I think that I'm doing what God's asking me to do. There's a measure of obedience in that, but it's superficial. In the end, it's superficial. It's self-serving. It can even become idolatry if we're not careful. So you're not hearing me say don't keep the Torah, right? I'm definitely not saying that. But what I am saying is that if you're going to be striving to keep the Torah, you better be doing it from a heart that's full of being filled with the Spirit, like Paul says in Ephesians, right? Be not drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. That's a command. That's a command. You want to keep the Torah? Start by being filled with the Spirit, and then let the Holy Spirit tell you how to keep the Torah. That's the way it's going to work. Pastor Piper finishes by saying, this is what we must die to. And he's talking about dying to, striving to conform to a list of do's and don'ts, as if it's this routine that we have to follow, and we don't have any idea of what it means to love God and love our neighbor. In fact, here's a challenge, and I'll probably close with this, and we'll pick this up. He says, I say to these particular comments, I wholeheartedly agree. We'll pick this up next week, starting in this paragraph. But in closing, let me say this. If you are striving to be Torah obedient or shomer mitzvot, right? You're striving to be more like Messiah by keeping the commandments, and you're definitely on board with the two greatest, right? Love God, love your neighbor, just like Yeshua commanded. And yet you find yourself failing from time to time. Here's a part of the way this is going to play out. I'm not saying this is going to be true for everybody, but what you're going to find is as you're pursuing God and as you're pursuing love for God and love for your neighbor, you're going to find that oftentimes there might be a choice where you can keep what looks like a commandment of God for yourself personally, and yet you can make a sacrifice for someone else. You can defer to other people, other believers, other people in your community, or your spouse, or your children, and so you give up your own personal freedoms. Like, say, I want to dig into Bible study on my own, but maybe my spouse desires my attention, or requires my attention, or my community, or something like that. I'm not saying you're always going to have to pit the two against one another, but what you're going to find that the Spirit is going to lead you to sacrifice. The Spirit's going to lead you to defer. The Spirit's going to lead you to take the low path instead of always going the high path. He's going to have you, when I say low path, I mean he's going to cause you to not always want your ideas to be first and foremost. He's going to cause you to not always want your voice to be the more prominent one. He's going to continue to motivate you to build other people up, and to like we learned in our Romans study as we looked at Romans 14 and Romans 15, to defer to the other people, to build the other brother up, to look out for his interests above your own. And this is indeed the model that Paul is going to outline for us throughout the rest of his letters as well, is that like Messiah became a servant to the Jewish people, Romans chapter 15, the first, say, 8 or 9 or 10 verses, we too must be servants to one another. And so that's the spirit-led life that you're going to find yourself engaged in as you're becoming more and more Torah obedient. You're not going to be put off when some of your own personal preferences are not met and needs are met. You're going to find joy in the fact that you have helped other people, you've prayed for other people, you've encouraged others, you've sacrificed your own time so that other people, other believers, first and foremost, have been in a place where they can have their needs met. And so that's really the walk of the Spirit. That's the walk of Torah. That's the walk of service. That's the walk of servitude. That's the one that was modeled by our Messiah, Yeshua. And that's going to do it for our Matthew 9:14 through 17, Judaism v. Christianity.